All right, can I get a motion to open the meeting?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
In-
to the flag of the
United States of America,
and
and
to
to
the
the
republic
for which it stands, one
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice.
justice for all.
Okay. All right. Superintendent's report.
You have to do public input first or
Oh,
not?
I'm sorry, my bad. I went past it. Who's our tech guy? We have, what's this?
Vinny.
Vincent, yes.
I was gonna say Vincent. I thought it was Vinny.
It's either one's fine.
Okay, great. Public input one, if there's anybody in the chat room that has any questions or would like to speak at public input number one, please feel free to do so. We have 3 minutes. There'll be no speaking of any individual or student. And please keep your comments to the Board of Education and know that you are being recorded. So, Vinny, do we have anybody in that has their hand up?
We do not.
Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Mr. Nichols.
So the superintendent's report this evening, since it's an educational meeting, is pretty brief. For those of you who don't know, this week is School Boards Recognition Week. The New York State School Boards Association sponsors the week to recognize the service that the school board members in our district and other districts in New York State provide to their local communities. In that spirit, Ms. Carriero and Mr. Malone have prepared something that speaks to your service. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Carriero to start.
Great. So we did it by school, as you can see. So the first one that is up is our high school. Sue Nicoletti, our chorus director, had the students sing you a song, and here it is.
We will be singing a song titled What I Did for Love, which is from the Broadway show A Chorus Line. The dancers discuss their passion for being a Broadway dancer and how they would never regret their choice of following this passion. We appreciate your passion for education and want to thank you for all of your time and your efforts in making the education of the children of Sag Harbor better. We hope you enjoy Pearson High School's chorus's rendition of What I Did for Love.
So that was our chorus.
That was
and then-
amazing.
That was awesome. I love that song.
Yeah, that's a great song.
And I think Miss Nicoletti, as everyone will know, is very happy to be singing again, even if it's in our beautiful courtyard. And it's a good use for it. So that was our high school. Our middle school, I'm going to have Miss Rodriguez Mora, who took lead on this, explain what this is, this art.
It's beautiful.
Hi, everyone. So our sixth graders are soaring in their transition to middle school, and they created this piece of appreciative artwork under the direction of Mrs. Finnegan, their sixth grade art teacher. So these are three-dimensional butterflies. Each child designed their own, and they had a lot of fun watching them be put up. And this is sitting next to our library, so right in the central core of our middle school hallways.
Great. It's
Yep,
absolutely
looks great.
Awesome.
And Mr. Malone, you're up.
Okay. So next we have a thank you from all the pre-K through grade 5 classes. Worked collaboratively on this, and those that know morning program well may recognize the song that's being shared.
We appreciate you. We think you are great. We appreciate you. Yeah, you really great. You make us so happy with the things you say and do. Oh, we appreciate you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We appreciate you. We think you are neat. We appreciate you. Yeah, you can be neat. You make us so happy with the things you say and do. Oh, we appreciate you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We appreciate you. We think you are cool. We appreciate you. Yeah, you really rule. You make us so happy with the things you say and do. Oh, we appreciate you. Yes, we appreciate you. Oh, we appreciate you. Yeah.
That was really sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Malone and Ms. Carriero. That does it for the superintendent's report. I see, Brian, that you are back. So is it okay if we proceed with the educational report?
Yes, please. Sorry about being late. I was having trouble getting on.
No worries. So we had talked at the last board meeting about scheduling 3 or 4 educational presentations during the course of this year. And following that meeting, I met with our building administrators, assistant principals, director of pupil personnel, and we tried to come up with a schedule, which we since have. And the first presentation this evening focuses on English as a new language. And we'll talk a little bit about the different names that program has had over the years. It was English as a second language, ESL, and other titles as well. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to the administrators, and they're going to walk you through essentially an overview of the program so you can understand the steps and the steps that schools take when someone comes into school without the language skills in English necessary to navigate what they need to navigate. And then the the thought process that we go through in terms of scheduling them, both with regard to what's best for them educationally and what's also mandated. So with that, I'll turn it over to, is it Ms. Carriero or Mr. Malone who's starting?
Mr. Malone.
I'm gonna do the intro slide. So as Mr. Nichols said, our goal tonight is to try to offer to all the board members, some who have been on the board for a while and some who are new, as well as to the members of the community who are tuning in, an overview of the program that serves students who are learning English as a second language. As Jeff mentioned, terminologies change often. We as administrators often at board meetings refer to a lot of different acronyms, and sometimes that can be confusing. We do want to spend some time just reviewing the legislation that guides the programs that public schools in New York have to provide to these students. We're next going to talk about how children become eligible for the services that are provided in our schools. There's a screening process, and from that, students are then given hopefully the support that they need to develop their skills as readers, writers, and speakers of English. We'll touch upon what the program looks like in our buildings from the work that the ENL teachers provide, but is also what the classroom teachers and support personnel provide throughout the buildings. Touch briefly on enrollment numbers, current, and touch upon some of the trends we're seeing. And with that, as an administrative team and as a faculty and staff, always thinking ahead to the future about supports that we will need to keep in place and possibly consider adding to the program that we have so that we're able to provide the right instruction and scaffolded support for these children.
Great. So the first slide is what Mr. Malone spoke about and Mr. Nichols about the jargon, right? So education always has these 3-letter, 4-letter, or these acronyms that are so confusing. And when we speak to our community, sometimes they're like, what does that even mean? So let's go over the terms first. English as a second language, that was historically what everything was encompassed and called. Now it usually refers to the program that our students that are learning English, and it's not their native language. That's their program that they are getting. ENL, English as a new language, that is the new terminology that New York State has rolled out. And English language learner, those are our students that are in the program. Their native language is not English. And then multilingual learners, these are our learners that might come from different countries or have had different experiences at different countries. So their native languages, they don't even, might be even considered having a native language because they're learning so many at once. Or they might have a native language, they have another language, and then they're learning English. And then this has been a big change for us, especially at middle high school, our SIFE students. Those are students with interrupted, inconsistent formal education. So this means that they could have gone up to 3rd grade, taken a break, haven't gone to school, and then they might come to us in 7th grade as a 12-year-old, and they've missed a huge gap of fundamental learning in their native language. And then it could even, and I believe the legislation says up to 6 months. So it could be up to 6 months, but sometimes we have kids that are a few years out of not having formal education. Now the legislation is Part 154, that's what it's referred to. It's the educational law that mandates that we have the standards and educational service provided to our English language students in New York State. We work on this and we make sure that our program, our schedule at the elementary, middle, and Sag Harbor Learning Center are all reaching those students' needs. And this document is in place in Sag Harbor, and it's a living working document. We reflect on it all the time. We meet, and it's by our administrators and our ENL and ESL staff. And it requires regular updates because guidance can shift. And also our community of learners shifts as well, especially in Sag Harbor. So we are going to go over now the role of the English as a second language, the teachers and the program. So the specialized professionals, these teachers have been taught how to teach a language, even if they do not understand or know the native language of our learners, and they've achieved state-specific credentials in order to do so. The screeners and assessments, they are professionally developed and well-versed in doing these assessments because they are a little bit difficult and they need to be administered. There's a screener right when students come into our district and they're registering. And then there's always an assessment at the end of the year to see the progress that our students are making. And this monitors the English language acquisition of our ELL, or English language learners, or MLL, or multilingual language learners. So it's for all ages these ESL teachers work with, and it's to assist to make sure that they become fluent in English, as well as they're still understanding and learning. And that's why sometimes we're able to, depending on the native language of the learner, be able to, depending on the teacher, go back and forth into their native tongue so that they can understand the English language easier. And then our instructional models. We want to make sure our curriculum and instruction is reaching our students. And we want to make sure that we are providing them the best that they can get so that they're able to feel at home and comfortable in the classroom. So these ESL teachers employ a variety of instructional models and supports for our Ls. This can be a push-in service where it's almost like an integrated co-teaching model where the ESL teacher is in the classroom with the English language learners, or it can be a standalone with them learning the fundamentals and grammar of English. And then there's the SIFE services with the student for with interrupted formal education services. And those can be like, they will have more standalones periods and have more of a hands-on one-to-one small group instruction in order to get to that integrated model. And then the cultural bridge. This is pretty big in Sag Harbor. We want to make all of our students feel safe and comfortable. And our ESL teachers do a very good job of making sure this cultural bridge, depending on where they're coming from or where their culture and how they identify as, and it's drawing those connections between the students and their native culture with a new cultural experience of being in America, but making sure that we are making sure that their culture is not being identified. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mears, who's going to speak about the screening process.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Carriero, and good evening, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about how our students are identified as we welcome them into the district. And there's a regulated and stepwise process for screening, identification, and placement for new students. Part of our registration packet includes a home language questionnaire, or an HLQ. This helps us identify and screen any potential English language learners based on a few questions about what language is spoken at home. If there is a language identified on this questionnaire, initial screening is conducted by one of the qualified personnel that Ms. Carriero just reviewed. The screening consists of a parent conversation initially and a student interview. Some of the tools used include, maybe depending on the interview and the interpretations from our staff, the SIFE oral interview questionnaire, and or the multilingual literacy SIFE screener. In addition to some of the questions, there's some questions that the staff are trained on asking. They also determine whether or not the student may or may not need support in English. If it's determined that the student does need support, then they administer the New York State Identification Test for English language learners. And we call this NICETEL for short. And again, it's administered by a qualified teacher. If we can get to the next slide. I believe I'm doing the next slide as well. So this NICETEL identifies the English ability and the stage of English language acquisition, and then it also helps determine the level of the support the student needs. This assists with prescribing through New York State education guidelines the level of support. And also the staff that are doing and conducting administers, because they're district staff, it helps inform any other wraparound support the student may need. And this is why it's so essential to have highly qualified staff to participate in this process. Some of the stages for initial language assessment are entering or beginning, emerging, which is a lower or intermediate, transitioning, which is intermediate, expanding, which is advanced, and commanding, which is proficient. And even after students move through that commanding proficient, the students still continue to receive support from the district and could potentially still receive testing accommodations if needed. All this information the district provides to parents in their home and students in their home language. This includes the screening, the identification, and the entire process. And additionally, a parent and family orientation is also offered in the beginning of the year for all students who need this service. Lastly, when we talk about placement and assessment for students, we're really looking at continuing to progress monitor. You know, when you looked at all those stages, how are they doing? And there's another assessment that we use that's similar to the NYSA called the NYSA SLOT. And the NYSA SLOT is the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test. And it really assesses the students' progress through all those categories that we just briefly mentioned. Similar to this, we provide this assessment yearly and annually to assess that progress. And that's how we determine the level of staff we need and also the support for the students. Additionally, any and all students who receive these service or progress monitored through the general supports that we have that is pretty robust through all of our building-based supports, including the multi-tiered systems of support like RTI and any special education services. I believe next we'll be talking about building a student program, and Mr. Guinan will be walking us through that.
Thank you, Dr. Mears. So we thought it would be helpful to walk you through what the experience is for a family and a student who come to us and qualify for English language learning services. So though this young man looks like Waldo with the striped shirt and the glasses, we'll call him David. And David's experience is similar to many of our families who arrived in September, and we've since incorporated into our school community. So David shows up on September 9th, the first day of school. We did not know he was coming. He comes with his parents, and they do the registration paperwork with our registrar, which includes the home language survey. And we determined that David does not speak English at home. So we administer the NYSA to determine his English level, which Dr. Mears went over before, and he is entering a beginner. We also do some SIFE screening to determine that David has had interruptions in his education up until now, and will require and be eligible for SIFE services. So we build a program for David that includes some classes specifically for SIFE students to help them with their literacy skills and to adapt to schooling in the US. And we also work together as a student support team to orient the student and their family into the school community. We've had many students come this year who presented us with this challenge, but we've rallied all of the student support staff, including the ENL teachers, the guidance counselors, social workers, administrators. We've marshaled the resources, and we're mobilizing to meet their needs well. So here's just a look at over the past 3 years, the numbers for our ENL population. They're pretty stable in the elementary school and mostly stable at Pearson as well, a slight uptick this year. But if you notice the students with interrupted formal education, there has been a significant increase this year. And we're working very hard to meet their needs. So now that we've inducted David, we're going to work on making sure our programming meets his needs as we expand our abilities to do that. And Ms. Rodriguez-Mora will walk you through that.
Sure. So now that we are looking at an increase in our population, we are taking this moment to revisit our services, and we're looking at how we can continue and expand our support for our ELL population. So we're looking at continuing to implement a culturally responsive interpretation and translation service that facilitates language access. We're doing that by revisiting our district registration process and also by streamlining our school communication. We're also looking at how to maintain comprehensive support for families as they navigate the US educational system. We're doing that through our parent orientation. We're looking at ways to increase teacher communication, and we're also looking at ways to connect our families with local advocacy groups. We're also continuing to offer evidence-based instructional delivery and supports. We continue to offer access to highly qualified staff. Our ENL teachers have really been instrumental in making sure that our programs are set up so that our students can be successful. They're doing this by continuously assessing students. So we talked about kind of those points of assessments that are required by the state, but now the real work begins in terms of really diving deeper to learn more about where the students are. And then all of our programming decisions are driven by individual student need based on this data. And then finally, we're also revisiting our community resources to support and connect families. We're looking to strengthen our relationships with community centers, local health and wellness providers, as well as local advocacy groups here on Eastern Long Island as well, in order to really support our families as they transition to a new country. And then just to close our presentation, we are really privileged to support a very culturally rich, talented, and diverse community of learners. We wanted to just name the countries and show you where our students are coming from. It's quite diverse, and the list continues to grow, and we're really excited to be able to have access to such a rich and talented, diverse community of students.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, any questions?
I have one. When parents come to our district, are they given a folder so that they have access to everything that's in our community? Like, do we have it ready to go for them?
Who wants to handle that one?
I think it depends on the school and the level. So I think we've been a little bit more hands-on in the registration process this year at the middle high school. Ms. Rodriguez Mora was instrumental in that process this year because I believe we had about almost 8 students the day before school started register with our school district. And I think we've also made some advocacy groups as well as community members, point people that we can connect those new families with, and they've actually helped, such as Ola, and then there's other community members that I will not name because it's specific people, but it depends on the school and where the connections are. Mr. Malone?
Well, before Matt goes, I also the type of outreach that occurs is more detailed than, I mean, we do hand them literature, but often it requires meetings, multiple meetings with families and students because they have so many questions. And it's even more complicated than just providing the information, to the extent that depending on their experience in their native country, sometimes they're not all that trusting of the educational institutions or institutions in general. So the outreach has to happen to build that trust. We were very lucky over the years to have someone on staff, Fausto Hinojosa, who filled that role. And he retired last year, but people have stepped in this year. Ms. Rodriguez Mora, Ms. Reynoso, and others. But I do think that big picture with the expanding SIFE population and the challenges that come with that, we may need to add some additional pieces to serve this population in the future. And I'll be coming to the board with those recommendations prior to budget season. But you know, that's big picture, really where we're at. Mr. Malone, do you want to add anything to Ms. Carriero's comments?
I think you both gave a great overview. Just to echo that, you know, Sag Harbor's approach is, you know, something that I think we're really proud of. It's one that's very individualized. We spend time in the beginning trying to get to know the family and then assess their needs, and then from there try to steer them in directions where the help may be available.
Okay, great, thanks.
And Sandy, do you have another question?
Nope, I said thank you.
Sorry, you cut out. Jeff, just to clarify for anyone watching, there's no time, like that this program is available to anybody who signs up anytime during the year? Maybe you or some of the staff can just touch on that. There's no like deadline or cutoff, so the school has to be prepared for this at all times.
Correct, because you do have people move into the district and register at different times, and also the learning needs or their level of language acquisition, familiarity with language changes, so their program can change. But Ms. Rodriguez Mora, do you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it, Jeff. I mean, we had a student who is not an ELL student registered today. I think there's also a lot of movement still with the pandemic. So as students arrive, we make sure that we serve them.
Great. Any other board questions?
I think it's worthy just to note one other piece. We often get trapped into thinking that ENL is strictly the Spanish language and the different forms of that language. But when you look at the list that Ms. Rodriguez Mora and the team put at the end of the presentation, you see that we have students from all over the world.
Yeah.
And so we've got languages other than Spanish that we're dealing with, and cultures that are different even within the Latino community that have different challenges. So it's a multifaceted opportunity, if you will, for the school personnel to be resourceful and thoughtful in terms of meeting these students' needs.
Great. No, I think it's great. And I think presenting this to the board and the community is important so they know of going forward meetings just like this and things that the school has and what we do and offer. So I appreciate everybody putting that together for the board and for the public tonight.
Brian, I just have 2 questions quick, if I may.
Absolutely, Ryan, please.
Just regarding the assessment that you mentioned, the NYSESLAT achievement test, I believe. Do we know how that compares in our district to other neighboring districts in terms of how how these students are performing with the services we're giving them? And also regarding the SIFE, that seems like a very high percentage of ELL students that we have this year. Is that consistent with what's happening in other districts, and do we anticipate seeing that in the future, or do we feel that that's something related to COVID?
I'll start with the part 2 of that question, Ryan. I don't have the data to comment with any authority as to whether or not that number is correlates with neighboring districts. I do know that up until this year, some of the neighboring districts have been dealing with SIFE students in greater numbers than Sag Harbor. So this challenge is new, at least during my 20 some odd years in Sag Harbor. This is quite a new development, especially given the numbers. Again, I don't know the specific reason. I don't know if it's COVID related. Maybe we can comment on that a little more towards the end of the year when we gain some additional information as to the reasons why some of these families have moved to Sag Harbor. But at this point, I couldn't comment on it with any degree of authority or knowledge. And who wants to address the first part of that question with regard to the level? I know before I turn it over to somebody, the 2 tests administered, one is sort of a baseline assessment when the students first come into the district to assess where they're at so that they can be placed. And then the NYSESLAT is administered at the end of the year to measure where they're at the end of the year. So I think that the real data to look at would be the amount of growth that takes place during a year. And then if I were to apply that to the question you asked, to then take that amount of growth and compare it to other districts in terms of what they're achieving. But I would think that the variables are so, there are so many different variables, and I'm not sure the extent to which those comparisons would really give or lend you to some valid conclusions in terms of performance. But that's something we'd be looking at. Dr. Mears or Anyone else, you want to comment on that?
Sure, Mr. Nichols, I could take that.
Sure.
I think you actually pretty much captured it. What we really want to look at with the NISA lot is that what we call the rate of progress. So after we get that baseline, we really look internally to look at that rate of progress, because a lot of it is based on individual student need. It's really hard to compare across districts due to the contextualization of the learning and each individual student's situation. So we really focus on that rate of progress, and we make sure that they're making progress through those categories. And we're also trying to keep track of the students afterwards. If we're feeling like the students are not making the rate of progress that we would expect, we pull in the supports. We have a robust level of supports and resources in the buildings to support students to make that progress. I think in the Sag Harbor School District, we have really high expectations, and the internal review of that progress is the essential piece. Trying to compare across districts might be a little bit challenging, and I'm not so sure how much that we'd be able to really inform practice doing that, but it is worth a look, and maybe we should consider that.
Yeah, the other thing to add, Ryan, and this is not as scientific, but for those students who are with us for a long time, even those who come with interrupted formal educations, if they're here for a number of years, we can follow them over time to see how they progress through middle school and high school. And so in the last 10 or 15 years, we've had students come through who were very limited with English language when they arrived. And several of them have gone on to, in fact, this past year, one of them got a full scholarship to NYU. So the program is successful. Unfortunately, sometimes some of the students who come with these interrupted formal educations are only here for a short amount of time, and then they move on, or they're here for a couple of months and then they leave for a couple of months, and that only compounds some of the problems that make it difficult for them to progress at the rate that we would like them to. But again, we do have, especially relative to other districts, a lot of resources to direct their way. So that's about as well as I can answer it where we're at right now.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
great.
just maybe a follow up to Ryan's question or Dr. Mears, the rate of progression, how is that tracked and how often?
So as Ms. Rodriguez Mora mentioned in her slide, we have the summative and formative assessments that are ongoing during the school year, which is more direct by our highly qualified staff. But again, back to what Mr. Nichols had mentioned, is we administer the NISA lot, and that generally tracks the rate of progress on an annual basis.
Got it. Thank you.
And I would say qualitatively, that every kid's making progress. And if they're not making progress, we've already had supports in place and talked with our PPS staff that it might be something else bigger going on, and we address it. But historically speaking, our students in our ENL or ESL program are at least jumping to the next level in that green trajectory that was put up with the beginner intermediate.
And then the other piece that I think is worth mentioning, so I'm glad all these questions are being asked, but Ms. Carriero had briefly touched upon in the beginning of the presentation, the cultural bridge. So the other measures that we're looking at are, to what extent are our students who have been classified ENL or receiving services, to what extent are they participating in co-curricular activities? Are they involved in Quiz Bowl? Are they involved in the theater program? Are they involved in the sports program, the theater program? I think I said that, but those are good measures to see whether or not these students are participating in the full educational program. Sometimes they have obligations outside of school, depending on their economic situation, but to the extent possible, we want to see them fully integrated into our day, both 9 to 3 and after as well.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board? Great. Okay.
Excellent job. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. It was
Excellent.
much greatly appreciated. Seeing or hearing nobody else, we will move on to section 8 of tonight's agenda, which is the consent agenda. The consent, is there a motion for consent agenda items 8.2 through 8.18?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Mary, I was unable to log in, so I vote aye.
Okay.
I'm sorry, is there any discussion? No discussion? Okay, Mary, open the voting. I vote aye.
I vote aye too. I couldn't log in.
Okay.
Not letting me in either, Mayor.
Okay.
Oh, no, hold on. Wait. Am I?
Jordana, Ryan,
I was waiting to get a pop-up, but it didn't come up, so
Didn't pop
I.
up for me, so
oh
yeah.
wait, all right,
Yeah.
here we go. My apologies.
This is not raining. Yes, that's
That's unanimous.
Great. Okay. We will now go to nothing on for items of discussion.
I do. I want to just bring something up that tonight we just have approved all of the committees and liaisons. So please see which one you were selected on and make sure that there is a meeting held within the next month to all the administrators and the board members, and that you're attending your liaison meetings. Because we will have gotten our first meeting going by November, and it's really important. And I want to give a special shout out to Mary, who worked side by side with me on this and did an excellent job contacting everybody. So thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. Okay, public input number 2. Is there anybody online for the public that would like to address the board with a question? Now would be the time to raise your hand or put your question into the chat room. And I do not see any hands. And I do not see any comments in the chat room. Okay. Next, I will put a motion on the floor with respect to an executive session. If the motion does carry, the board would go into executive session, at the conclusion of which we would just come out to close the meeting. No action would be taken by the board. So for the public, this would be the end of the meeting should that motion carry. And so is there a motion to convene into executive session to discuss bargaining unit negotiations, contracts, litigation, and the employment of a particular person?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? None? Okay. Mary, I vote aye. If you could open up the voting and or take.
Aye.
Okay. And Sandy, I got it.
Yeah.
That's unanimous.
Great. The board will go into executive session. So for board members, anyone invited into executive session, that link is in your mailbox. Please log in and we will see you there shortly. To the public, have a good evening.